The country club's main dining room buzzed with 30 years of Dad's professional relationships. Partners from Morrison, Blake and Associates filled the elegant space, celebrating his retirement after 3 decades of dedicated service to the firm. Crystal glasses clinked with expensive wine, and the conversation flowed as smoothly as the champagne fountains Mom had insisted on renting. I stood near the bar in my simple navy blazer and black pants, what Dad would call my trying to look professional outfit. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the golf course where he'd spent countless Saturday mornings networking with clients and building the relationships that had sustained his career. "Sarah, sweetheart." Mom appeared beside me, radiant in her emerald cocktail dress. "Isn't this wonderful? Everyone from the firm is here, even some of the senior partners from the New York office." "It's a beautiful celebration," I agreed, watching Dad work the room with practiced ease. At 65, he still commanded attention when he walked into a space, still had that lawyer's way of making everyone feel like the most important person in the conversation. "He's so proud tonight," Mom continued. 30 years with the same firm, never missed a promotion cycle, built one of their most profitable client portfolios. She squeezed my arm. "I just wish." "What, Mom?" "Well, I wish you could have found something more established. Something he could brag about to his colleagues." I'd heard this conversation before. Many times. "Marketing consulting is a real job, Mom." "Of course it is, sweetie. It's just, when people ask what you do, freelance marketing sounds so temporary. Like you're still figuring things out at 29. Before I could respond, Dad's voice boomed across the room. "Gentlemen, let me introduce you to my youngest daughter, Sarah." I walked over to where he stood with a group of senior associates, all holding drinks and wearing the satisfied expressions of successful lawyers celebrating a colleague's well-earned retirement. "Sarah," Dad announced proudly, "these are some of my colleagues from the corporate division. Tom Peterson, Mike Rodriguez and James Chin." The men shook my hand with polite interest. "What do you do, Sarah?" Tom asked. Before I could answer, Dad jumped in with his practiced explanation. "Sarah works in marketing. Freelance stuff, mostly small business clients." The slight emphasis on small wasn't lost on anyone. "The digital marketing space," Mike nodded knowingly. "Lots of opportunity there for people willing to hustle." "Exactly," Dad agreed. "Sarah's always been entrepreneurial. Takes after her old man in that regard." He chuckled. "Though she hasn't quite figured out the corporate world yet." James smiled politely. "Freelancing can be challenging. No benefits, irregular income. Takes a certain personality type." "That's what we keep telling her," Dad said with fond exasperation. "Her sister Jennifer has a wonderful position at the bank vice president level, full benefits, real career track. But Sarah prefers doing her own thing." "Independence has its appeal," Tom offered diplomatically. "To a point," Dad replied. "But eventually most people want stability. Security. Sarah's still in that experimental phase." The conversation continued around me while I smiled and nodded. It was fascinating, really watching my father construct a narrative that positioned me as the family's lovable underachiever. The daughter who was trying her best but hadn't quite grasped how the real world worked. "The thing about corporate law," Dad was explaining to the group, "is that it teaches you how business actually functions. Sarah's marketing work is creative, but she doesn't see the bigger picture. The financial structures, the strategic planning, the long-term relationship building that drives real success." Mike nodded sagely. "That's the advantage of working within an established firm. You learn from people who've built something substantial." "Exactly," Dad agreed. "Take Morrison, Blake and Associates. 120 years of continuous operation, offices in 12 cities, some of the most prestigious clients in the country. That's the kind of institution that creates real careers." I glanced around the room at the Morrison, Blake partners and associates, all nodding along with Dad's tribute to their firm's excellence. They were good people, competent lawyers who worked hard and served their clients well. They were also, as of 3 years ago, my employees. "Dad," I said quietly, "can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Gentlemen, excuse us." We walked toward a quieter corner of the room, near the windows overlooking the 18th green. "Dad, I need to tell you something about my work." His expression shifted to that patient, slightly concerned look he used when preparing to give fatherly advice. Sarah, if this is about money, you know your mother and I are always happy to help until you get established in something more permanent. It's not about money. Because there's no shame in acknowledging when freelancing isn't working out. Tom Peterson was just telling me they might have an opening in their marketing department, entry level, but good benefits and room for growth. Dad, I don't need a job. He smiled indulgently. Sweetie, everyone needs a job. That's how the world works. I have a job. I run a company. I know you call your freelance work a company, but Dad. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. Last month, my company acquired Morrison, Blake and Associates. He stared at me for a moment then laughed. Sarah, what are you talking about? 3 years ago, when the firm was facing financial difficulties after the Henderson class action lawsuit, they needed capital investment. My company, Strategic Holdings Group, provided that investment in exchange for majority ownership. Dad's smile faltered. That's not possible. It's completely possible. And documented. Morrison, Blake and Associates is now a subsidiary of Strategic Holdings Group, which I founded and own. Sarah, stop joking around. This is serious. I turned my phone screen toward him and showed him the corporate filing documents. Strategic Holdings Group founded 2019 CEO Sarah Mitchell. Morrison, Blake and Associates, acquired 2021 for $47 million. Dad's face went through several distinct phases: confusion, disbelief, and then a peculiar grayish color I'd never seen before. You can't. Sarah, this is impossible. Is it? Or did you just never pay attention when I tried to tell you about my work? Before he could respond, a familiar voice called out across the room. Sarah. There's my favorite board member. We both turned to see Robert Morrison III, the managing partner of Morrison, Blake and Associates, walking toward us with a broad smile. At 72 he was the firm's senior statesman, the man whose family name was still on the letterhead after 4 generations. Dad watched in apparent paralysis as Mr. Morrison approached with obvious warmth and familiarity. Robert, I said, standing to give him a hug. Thank you for organizing such a beautiful celebration for Dad. Are you kidding? After 30 years of exemplary service, Richard deserves the best send-off we can arrange. He turned to Dad with genuine affection. Richard, you've been one of our most valuable partners. Your retirement is well earned. Dad managed to nod, though he looked like he might be having some kind of medical episode. Sarah, Mr. Morrison continued, I wanted to update you on the quarterly projections before Monday's board meeting. The new client acquisitions are tracking 20% above forecast. That's excellent news, I replied. The marketing restructure is paying off faster than we projected. Absolutely. Your strategic vision has transformed how we approach client development. Dad was staring at this exchange like he was watching a tennis match played in a foreign language. Robert, I said gently, I don't think Dad realizes that I'm on the board of directors. Mr. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Richard, you didn't know? Sarah's been our youngest board member for 2 years now. Brilliant strategic mind, she's revolutionized our approach to digital marketing and client relations. She's on the board? Dad's voice came out as barely a whisper. Not just on the board, Mr. Morrison continued proudly. She's our majority stakeholder. Strategic Holdings Group saved this firm when we needed it most, and Sarah's leadership has taken us to new levels of profitability. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ice melting in someone's drink across the room. Majority stakeholder, Dad repeated slowly. 68% ownership, I confirmed. Though we operate as a partnership in terms of day-to-day management. Dad looked back and forth between us like we might suddenly reveal this was an elaborate practical joke. Richard, Mr. Morrison said kindly, you should be incredibly proud. Sarah built Strategic Holdings Group from nothing and turned it into one of the most successful investment firms in the region. She owns controlling interests in 12 companies across 4 states. 12 companies, Dad echoed. Law firms, marketing agencies, real estate development, technology consulting, Mr. Morrison listed. Sarah's created an empire while most people her age are still figuring out their career paths. I watched my father process this information. 3 years of dismissing my freelance marketing work, while I was actually signing his paychecks. 3 years of explaining to his colleagues how I hadn't figured out the corporate world while I was restructuring his firm's entire business model. Dad, I said gently, every promotion you've received in the last 3 years, every bonus, every benefit improvement, those came through recommendations I made to the board. His legs seemed to give out slightly and he leaned against the window frame. You've been my boss? Technically yes. Though I've always made sure to recuse myself from any decisions directly affecting your career. I thought that was more appropriate. Mr. Morrison laughed. Sarah's been incredibly professional about maintaining boundaries. Most of us didn't even realize the connection until tonight. Dad was looking around the room with new eyes, seeing his retirement party, his colleagues, his career achievements, his professional legacy, through a completely different lens. All those times, he said slowly, all those times you tried to tell me about your work. You kept changing the subject, I finished gently. Or explaining why freelancing wasn't sustainable long-term. Because I assumed. You assumed what you wanted to assume. It was easier than listening to details about business models and acquisition strategies. Mom appeared beside us, having noticed Dad's apparent distress from across the room. Richard, what's wrong? You look pale. Margaret, Mr. Morrison said warmly, congratulations on raising such an accomplished daughter. Sarah's been instrumental in securing the firm's future. Mom looked confused. I'm sorry, what do you mean? Sarah owns Morrison, Blake and Associates, Dad said in a monotone voice. She's been signing my paychecks for 3 years. Mom's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. She owns the law firm? Mom whispered. Among other things, Mr. Morrison confirmed. Strategic Holdings Group has quite an impressive portfolio. I pulled out another document from my jacket pocket. Actually, I have something for you both. Dad took the envelope with shaking hands and opened it. Inside was a deed transfer document. What is this? He asked. It's the vacation house in Maine. The one you and Mom have been dreaming about for retirement. I smiled. I bought it 6 months ago and had it renovated exactly the way you described. The wraparound porch, the updated kitchen, the dock for your boat. Mom started crying. Sarah, I don't understand. All this time we thought you were struggling. I was never struggling. I was building. But you live in that small apartment, you drive that old car. I live simply because I prefer it that way. Having money doesn't mean you have to spend it on things that don't matter to you. Dad was staring at the deed like it might vanish if he blinked. Sarah, this house must have cost. It doesn't matter what it cost. What matters is that you have a place where you can enjoy your retirement. Mr. Morrison was beaming. Richard, you raised an exceptional daughter. She's got the finest business mind I've encountered in 40 years of practice. Other partners and associates had begun gathering around us, drawn by the obvious drama unfolding near the windows. What's happening? Asked Tom Peterson, the same man who'd offered to help me find an entry-level marketing position 20 minutes earlier. Richard just discovered that his daughter Sarah is the owner of our firm, Mr. Morrison announced. The effect was immediate. Every conversation in the room stopped. 50 lawyers and their spouses turned to stare at our little group by the windows. Sarah Mitchell? Asked Jennifer Walsh, one of the senior partners. You're Sarah Mitchell from Strategic Holdings? I am. I've been reading your articles in Corporate Strategy Quarterly for 2 years. Your piece on cross-sector acquisition models revolutionized how I approach client development. More people began crowding around, suddenly very interested in talking to the woman they'd been politely ignoring as Richard's daughter who does freelance work. Ms. Mitchell, said David Kim, a junior associate, I used your digital marketing framework for the Henderson client pitch. It was brilliant. Thank you, I said. Though please just call me Sarah. Dad stood in the center of this growing crowd, watching colleagues who'd known me as his underachieving daughter suddenly treat me like a celebrity. The Morrison acquisition, said Patricia Forbes, another senior partner. That was you? The strategic restructure that saved us from bankruptcy. Strategic Holdings specializes in revitalizing professional service firms, I explained. Morrison, Blake had incredible talent and client relationships. It just needed better financial structure and updated marketing approaches. Updated marketing approaches, Dad repeated weakly. The digital transformation initiative increased client acquisition by 40% in the first year, Mr. Morrison added proudly. 40%, Dad echoed. I looked at my father, this man who'd spent 30 years building a successful career, who'd provided for his family and earned the respect of his peers, who was genuinely good at what he did. He just couldn't see past his assumptions about what success was supposed to look like. Dad, I said, taking his arm and guiding him away from the crowd, walk with me. We stepped onto the club's terrace, where the evening air carried the scent of the golf course and the distant sound of traffic from the city below. I feel like I don't know you, he said quietly. You know me perfectly well. I'm the same person who used to help you with client presentations when I was in college. The same person who's always been interested in business strategy and marketing. The same person who's been trying to share my professional excitement with you for years. But I thought you were struggling. Because you assumed that anything outside traditional employment meant struggle. You couldn't imagine that someone might choose a different path and be successful at it. Dad leaned against the terrace railing, staring out at the lights of the city. All those times I offered you job interviews, all those lectures about stability and benefits. You were trying to help. I understand that. I was being condescending to someone who could buy and sell my entire career. Dad, you built something important at Morrison, Blake. 30 years of excellent work, hundreds of satisfied clients, a reputation for integrity and competence. That matters. That has value. But you own the whole firm. I own the financial structure. You own the relationships and expertise that make it valuable. We're partners in different ways. He turned to look at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between admiration and bewilderment. Sarah, I owe you an apology. A massive apology. You owe me attention, I corrected gently. The kind of attention that would let you see who I actually am instead of who you're afraid I might be. I called you a disappointment. In front of my colleagues. Tonight. I know. How can you forgive that? Because you're my father and you said it out of love, even if it was misguided love. You were worried about my future, not trying to hurt me. Dad reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. I need to call your sister. Why? Because I've spent 3 years comparing you unfavorably to Jennifer's banking job, and now I find out you could probably buy the bank she works for. I laughed. I don't want to buy her bank. And her success doesn't diminish just because mine looks different than you expected. Different, he said with a hollow laugh. Sarah, you're 29 years old and you own 12 companies. I'm 29 years old and I've worked 16-hour days for 8 years to build something meaningful. The companies are just the result. We stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The vacation house, Dad said finally. Yes. You really bought it for us? I really did. Full ownership transfer, no strings attached. I thought you might like having a place where you can fish and Mom can have her garden. After everything I said tonight, everything I assumed about your life. Dad, you raised me to be independent, to work hard and to take care of the people I love. That's exactly what I did. He turned to me with tears in his eyes. I'm proud of you, Sarah. Not because of the money or the companies, but because you did this with integrity. You built something real. Thank you. Can we start over? Can you forgive a stubborn old lawyer who was so focused on conventional success that he couldn't see the extraordinary success happening right in front of him? I hugged him tightly. There's nothing to forgive. There's just moving forward with better understanding. As we walked back into the party, I realized that the real victory wasn't proving my success to Dad's colleagues. It was finally having the chance to share my actual life with parents who could see me clearly. The retirement party continued until nearly midnight, but with a completely different energy. Dad's colleagues wanted to discuss business strategies and investment opportunities. Mom proudly explained to anyone who'd listen that her daughter was in corporate acquisitions. And Dad himself seemed to stand a little taller, not because his daughter's success reflected on him, but because he was finally seeing her for who she really was. Later that night, as I stood in my simple apartment looking out at the city I'd invested so much in, I reflected on how the evening had unfolded. The most valuable revelation wasn't about money or ownership or business success. It was about the difference between being seen and being understood, and how much sweeter success becomes when you can share it with people who truly know who you are.